Geopolitik, Doctrine of National Self-Sufficiency and Empire, by Johannes Mattern. Baltimore, the Johns Hopkins Press, 1942. Chapter 6. The New Science Holds Forth. Schelling, as will be recalled, has shown, at least to his own satisfaction, the need for a new political science which will do justice to the realities of the life of the modern state, and of the modern state's relation with its kind. His next step is that of developing the content and the methodology of his new political science. Schelling pointed out that the real living state has many sides or many contents: the legal, the geographical, the ethnical, the social, the economic. He showed how each one of the sciences, corresponding to these five aspects, had sought to capture the status of official science of the state. He concludes that only a new all-inclusive geopolitical science will be capable, and as such entitled, to assume that position. It is that new geopolitical science which he sets out to expound. Thus he starts with an analysis of the state in its five aspects, as five elements of the same force, five fingers of the same hand, working together in peace and fighting together in war. In the state as a form of life, he presents these five elements in the following sequence: territory or realm, Reich; people, Volk; household, Haushalt; society, Gesellschaft; and government, Regierung. The significance of this sequence is to be found in the fact that the legal element, of old considered the only element to be studied by the science of the state, forms the rear guard of the five-fold array, and that in Schelling's new geopolitical science, the territorial element marches in front. Let us see in brief what Schelling has to say concerning each of these five elements. 1. The state viewed as the realm. The starting point in Schelling's system of the new geopolitical science is the realm, das Reich. It is the criterion which differentiates state from state in their relations to each other. As mentioned before, the realm or territorial element asserts itself in such names as England, Deutschland, Russland, Finland, Netherlands, Denmark, Sverige, etc. Geopolitik is a specific branch, a subdivision of the larger new science of politics. Considering the state as a living organism, Geopolitik views the realm, the territory, as the body of the state. The possession of a realm as organized territory in which the folk has grown distinguishes a state from a non-state, such as the Catholic Church, the Jesuit Order, the Hansa, the North German Lloyd, nomadic hordes, or, to give examples more familiar to the Anglo-American reader, such as the Masonic Order, the Ku Klux Klan, the Communist Party, the German-American Bund. Geopolitik recognizes various types of states, the type being determined by the character of the body. The realm, such as city-states, empire states, continental states, island states, and others. Now, if the state is a biological organism, and if the realm is the body of the state, then it follows, say Ratzel and Schelling, that the state, like every other biological organism, must grow and have organs. The organs needed to live: a heart and lungs, the capital and administrative center, arteries and veins, rivers, roads, railroads, limbs, regions containing the various raw materials and producing the food required. According to Schelling, it would follow that the realm as the body of the state is more essential than the people living upon the land, for the simple reason that the people replenish themselves, while the loss of territory is like the loss of an organ of the body. A violation of the territory of a state is a crime against the person, not the property, of the state. Geopolitik is concerned with the consequences to be drawn from this conception, i.e., with the duty of the state to preserve the territory of the realm and its resources, as analogous to man's obligation to preserve his body and his health. Geopolitik is concerned with the duty of the state to intensify the development of the realm in the case of the loss of a limb, and we shall see later, of securing missing limbs if need be, in any way they can be secured. Hence, geopolitik, as Schelling defines it, is the science which conceives the state as a geographic organism or as a phenomenon in space. Or to give the official definition worked out in conference by the German editors of the Zeitschrift für Geopolitik, quote, Geopolitik is the science dealing with the dependence of political events upon the soil. It is based upon the broad foundations of geography, especially political geography, which is the doctrine of political organisms of space and their structure. Geopolitik aims to furnish the armature for political action and guidance in political life. Geopolitik must come to be the geographical conscience of the state. End quote. In and through its territory, the state becomes geographically individualized, becomes a geographical individual. The outward manifestations of its individualization are the frontiers of the state. Thus, geopolitik concerns itself with the various types of state frontiers, natural frontiers such as the sea, common frontiers such as rivers and mountains. It considers the implications of frontiers for the life and safety of the state in relation to neighboring states. It deals with harmonious cohesion of the realm within its frontiers. It distinguishes between types of harmonious territory, such as the Potomac, the Mesopotamic, or circumfluvial, and the circummarine or seacoast type. Examples of the Potomac type are Nigeria, the Congo state, both built around the rivers which have given them their name, and roughly bounded by the watersheds of these rivers. Examples of the Mesopotamic or circumfluvial type are the ancient Babylonian and Assyrian empires, the predecessors of modern Mesopotamia, broadly speaking bounded by the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, or Portugal, created around three parallel rivers and their watersheds, the Douro, the Tagus, and the Guadiana rivers. The significance of these types in modern times for self-sufficiency and power politics lies in the possibility that part of these rivers, either the mouth or the source, may be in a competitor's or in an enemy's hands. The source of the Rhine lies in Switzerland, the mouth in Holland. Of the circummarine type, there is the insular type, such as the British Isles, with its expansion towards other seacoasts far across the seas, or the ancient Greek and Roman types of the peninsular states, expanding in fan shape to the adjacent islands and seacoasts. The geopolitical or real political interest here is the problems raised with regard to efficiency, safety, and defense of sea routes. Geopolitik applies to the realm the criterion of natural territory, i.e., it examines the capacity of the realm to feed its population as the basis for a self-sufficient economy. According to Schelling, this conception of the realm as the body of the state and the resulting obligation of the state to preserve and develop the realm resolve the great conflict of laissez-faire liberalism and socialism with regard to their respective doctrines concerning property rights in the soil. The state, says Schelling, shares its body with individuals only on condition that private owners use their property in a manner which does not violate the interests of the state. In other words, in deference to, and as a matter of preference for laissez-faire liberalism, the geopolitically conceived and managed state preserves formal ownership of land by private individuals. Equally in deference to, and as a matter of preference for socialism, it grants such private ownership for use only. Geopolitik considers the realm from the point of view of space, Raum, size, Lebensraum, shape. From the aspect of situation, a location in relation to the sea or to other states, and of changing situations, the change being affected by alteration of power status of one or more neighboring states. From the aspect of historic sides and of shifting historic sides, i.e., of the geographical focus and shift of geographical focus of political tensions in relation to other states. Geopolitik considers the realm from the point of view of space, Raum, size, Lebensraum, shape. From the aspect of situation, a location in relation to the sea or to other states, and of changing situations, the change being affected by alteration of power status of one or more neighboring states. From the aspect of historic sides and of shifting historic sides, i.e., of the geographical focus and shift of geographical focus of political tensions in relation to other states. Consideration of the state from the point of view of space, Raum, Lebensraum, implies the study of the growth of the realm as the body of the state. Historically considered, this means that geopolitik is concerned with the expansion by colonization or acquisition, peaceful or enforced, of neighboring territory. Says Schellen, vitally strong states with limited space are compelled under the categorical imperative to enlarge their space by colonization, amalgamation, or conquest. In this position was England and are today Japan and Germany, and he might have added Italy. This is clearly not a case of lust of conquest, but of natural and necessary growth. 2. Volk, folk, the people living upon or in the realm. The branch of the new geopolitical science dealing with this element of the state is ethnopolitics. It considers the state as an ethnic personality. It has to do with the relation of the people to the state. It considers folk as past, present, and future generations, and posits responsibility on the part of the state to regulate the life of the present generation, so as not to harm the interests of the generations to come. Ethnopolitics has to do with the relation of the nation to folk. Ethnopolitics has to do with the relation of the nation to folk and state, of nationalities to all three, and with the relation of race to folk and nation. It considers all these relationships genealogically, linguistically, psychologically, and biologically. It studies the relation of folk and state under the dual aspect of loyalty to state and to nationality, and the conflict between the two. It studies the position of the state with regard to the controlling and balancing of the two. Finally, ethnopolitics deals with the mathematical relation of the realm and people, i.e., the population policy, as a power factor in relation to the outside world. It is concerned about falling birth rate, the two-children system, birth control, as phenomena affecting the quality and vitality of the nation. For such phenomena constitute a taking leave from history, by the nation failing to avert these dangerous practices. Ethnopolitics must concern itself with the influence of people upon the territory, and of territory upon the people, as a factor determining their respective degrees of growth. It must concern itself with the responsibility of the state to guarantee or facilitate such growth. It must concern itself with the responsibility of the state to guarantee or facilitate such growth. Among many other vital problems facing geopolitik, from the point of view of the ethnical aspect as well as that of autarky and power politics, are or were the two conflicting pan-Slavic and pan-German movements of Schellen's time, and the contemporary plan for the creation of a Middle Europe under German hegemony, a plan which contemplated the inclusion within the Middle European realm of Teutons, Slavs, Turks, and Finns. Professor Friedrich Naumann was the chief proponent of that dream as described in his Mitteleuropa, first published in 1915. Footnote 1. Translated by Christabel Margaret Meredith and published in New York in 1917. A name to be mentioned with or next to that of Naumann is Paul Rohrbach, author of more than 24 books and booklets on the topic of Pan-Germanism, Pan-Slavism, the struggle between the two, and particularly the subject of German actual and projected expansion. The subject of German actual and projected expansionism. Of the many works, a few are here cited in chronological sequence. Die Russische Weltmacht in Mittel- und Westasien, Russian World Power in Middle and Western Asia, Deutschland unter den Weltvolken, Germany among the peoples of the world, Der Deutsche Gedanke in der Welt, the German idea in the world, published in English as German World Politics, Baghdad und Babylon, Der Krieg und die Deutsche Politik, published in English translation as Germany's Isolation, an exposition of the economic causes of the war, 1914 to 1918, Zum Weltvolk hindurch, striving towards a world outlook, Russland und wir, Russia and we, Der Kampf um Livland, Deutsch-Russisch, Ringen durch 7 Jahrhundert, the struggle over Livland, German-Russian conflict through 7 centuries, Deutschland, Tod oder Leben, Germany, death or life, Deutsch-Afrika, Ende oder Anfang, German Africa, end or beginning. Professor Friedrich Naumann was the chief proponent of that dream as described in his Mittel Europa, first published in 1915. 3. The state as household. The third aspect under which the state appears to the new geopolitical scientist is that of the household. The particular branch of geopolitical science dealing with this aspect is politics of economics. The term political economy would not suit because it fails to emphasize sufficiently the political or governmental planning aspect. Politics of economics goes beyond the concern with public finance, administration of state property, such as nationally owned forests, mines, waterways, roads, industrial enterprises such as postal and telegraph services, and the like. The significance of the economic aspect of the individual state is often expressed in its name. Argentina is the silver country, Brazil that of the Brazil tree, but such names fall far short of covering the extent of interest of the politics of economics and of the making of such politics. Growth of population and materialization of existence have increased the importance of the economic aspect, while on the other hand, growth of population and materialization of existence have increased the importance of the economic aspect, while on the other hand, politics of economics have enhanced both by furthering production and industry and their mechanization. The realm is the body of the state. It is the house and soil in which the folk must find its living. Organization of the realm must be directed to that purpose. Self-sufficiency, autarky, lies latent in the soil. It must be realized by efficient and ever more efficient exploitation of the soil. The state must organize this work so that it produces the greatest degree of self-sufficiency. But if the realm, the territory, becomes too small, or if it fails to offer the resources needed, it becomes the duty of the state to find both room and resources for its people outside of its own realm. Thus the state becomes a menage, a household, with a planned economy and economy planning for self-sufficiency. Political economy, or politics of economics, deals with the different types of state household, the commercial type, the rentier or investor type, and the colonial type. In the commercial type, import and export resemble the circulation of the blood. Theoretically, export of manufactured goods is to balance import of raw materials. Where it fails to do so in practice, the deficit is met from other income, from interest on capital invested abroad, invisible exports, from shipping profits, etc., so that the negative export balance forms part of the positive general trade balance. This, says Schellen, is the normal stage in all industrial countries. But as the lending abroad of earned capital increases, this type develops into the Rentner, the investor type of state household. At this stage, the commercial state becomes a creditor state in varying degrees, of course. Before the World War, England was approaching that status. France is or was its typical representative. It is the status in which commercial profits are invested, not in new production enterprises, but in loan reserves. The colonial type of state household is found where the center of concern is agrarian production, as for instance in Russia before the World War. The essence of this type is export of agricultural products and raw materials balanced by the import of manufactured goods, usually with a positive trade balance in favor of agricultural exports. But the financial balance may nevertheless be negative as a result of loans for financial expenditures of the state. But the financial balance may nevertheless be negative as a result of loans for financial expenditures of the state. In that case, the state household is in the category of the debtor economy. Russia before World War I was in that position, serving as a kind of unofficial colony to both Germany and France. The colonial type is the status of a relatively primitive economy. It is eventually replaced by industrialization, but even such industrialization usually leaves the country in a dependence upon the outside, hardly more satisfying than the former immature and backward status as a colony. It would then seem that the ideal state household type is to be found not in one extreme form or other, but in a status of balance between extremes. This ideal is found, according to Schellen, in autarky, in self-sufficiency, the situation in which a country or state succeeds in supplying from its own soil or within its own realm the essentials for the maintenance of its population. The German philosopher Fichte, the contemporary of Hegel, both mentioned by Professor Griswold as among those to whom scholars have retraced their steps in the search for the sources of the German dream of Lebensraum, has anticipated this sort of state household in the form of a socialist corporate or guild system under state control. In his still famous book, Der geschlossene Handelsstaat, the closed commercial state, a philosophical sketch as a supplement to jurisprudence and a test of a future system of politics. A philosophical sketch as a supplement to jurisprudence and a test of a future system of politics. Autarky, or the closed commercial state, means the absence of overdeveloped industry depending for existence and survival upon exports of its manufactured goods. It means a status of industry capable of existing independence upon the home market. It implies an agricultural production which does not depend upon foreign export, but which is capable of supplying a country industrialized to support home consumption of industrial goods. Autarky is a closed system of national economy which, in case of emergency, is capable of functioning by and within itself. It is self-evident that autarky presupposes the availability within its system of all the prerequisites for a self-sufficient agriculture and industry, and the acquisition of such prerequisites by the means indicated. Autarky is economic individuality of the state, just as the realm with its frontiers manifests geographic individuality, and nationality indicates ethnical individualization of the state. Autarky, says Schellen, is the latest reaction to the cosmopolitan industrialism of the 19th century, which placed the national household at the mercy of the competitive forces of the world market. In this struggle of competitive forces, the strong swallowed the weak. An earlier reaction against the competitive system was the protectionism of the middle and second part of the century. Under protectionism, the state household sets up tariff walls against trading invaders who threaten to upset the natural internal economic balance and bring home the realization that the state is, in the last analysis, more secure within its own Reich or folk. In this struggle of competitive forces, the strong swallowed the weak. An earlier reaction against the competitive system was the protectionism of the middle and second part of the century. Under protectionism, the state household sets up tariff walls against trading invaders who threaten to upset the natural internal economic balance and bring home the realization that the state is in the last analysis more secure within its own Reich and folk. This, Schelling concedes, is an oversimplified picture. The cosmopolitan industrial trading state did not withdraw and cannot withdraw entirely from world markets. Instead, it replaced the system of the open door by that of the closed interest sphere, the next best to the closed commercial state. Schelling points out that England followed this policy in various agreements with France in 1904, in the Chamberlain program of the Commercial Union with the autonomous colonies, and if Schelling had written later, he would have added in the Economic Conference in Canada of 1933. All these agreements were made on the basis not of free trade, but of protection and the closed interest sphere. In the case of Great Britain, it is a policy of concentration of trade within the orbit of the British Empire as the natural interest sphere of England. In the case of the Middle Europe planned by the Pan-Germans of First World War days, it was the prospect of trade within the orbit of Middle Europe as the natural interest sphere of Germany. In the case of the Hitler-planned New Europe, it is a case of the revival of that plan and enlargement of that orbit. Schelling cautions that the system of self-sufficiency should never go so far as to attempt the exclusion of all foreign trade. The policy of the closed doors of Japan, China, and Korea was maintained at a price stifling national growth. The same applies in the sphere of industry. The autarkic state, Schelling warns, cannot afford to confine itself chiefly to one type of industry, monoculture, the one-crop system in agriculture, for instance. In its prevailing system of currant growing, ancient Greece ran the risk of bankruptcy with every crop failure. The risks of a failure of rice crops in China, of wheat crops in Imperial Russia, of the cotton crop in our southern states would be modern examples fitting the situation. Hence, the self-sufficient state, or rather the state striving after self-sufficiency, must develop all the possible kinds of production and agriculture of which the nature and content of the soil are capable. And thus, according to Schelling, and according to geopolitical science, the ideal type of the state, or of the state household, is found in the balance of all types, in self-sufficiency, autarky, as a mean between the investor and colonial types, and as the best guarantee of the greatest degree of independence. Politics of economics deals with the activity of states as households. The state considered as household is concerned with the flow of capital and production, with the exchange of raw materials and manufactured goods, with the ways and means of establishing as nearly as possible autarky, self-sufficiency, and of remedying insufficiency by reciprocal exchange of the available raw materials and manufactured goods of one state for the available but different raw materials and manufactured goods of other states, not by the exchange of raw materials by one state for manufactured goods of another, or vice versa. Politics of economics deals with the activity of states as households. The state considered as household is concerned with the flow of capital and production, with the exchange of raw materials and manufactured goods, with the ways and means of establishing as nearly as possible autarky, self-sufficiency, and of remedying insufficiency by reciprocal exchange of the available raw materials and manufactured goods of one state for the available but different raw materials and manufactured goods of other states, not by the exchange of raw materials by one state for manufactured goods of another, or vice versa. 4. The state viewed as society. From Aristotle down to modern times, the social order has been considered as subordinate to the state. In his treatise on the Greek city-states, Aristotle goes so far as to say that the state is the highest of all human association, that it existed prior to all other human associations, just as the whole precedes the part. The reaction of modern sociology and political science, to an extent, goes to the other extreme of subordinating the state to the social order. Modern sociology, says Schelling, considers society, its nature and needs, from the larger aspect of humanity as dissociated from, or rather as transcending, the particular state. Sociopolitics, as a branch of the new geopolitical science, looks upon the social order in its direct relation to the specific state. Schelling rejects the doctrine which views society or the social order as superordinate to the state. This is the doctrine preached by the political pluralists, the Frenchman Duguet, the Hollander Crabbe, the American Follett, and for a time at least, if not still, the Briton Lasky. It is a doctrine to which all free and self-respecting souls will incline whenever a bureaucracy or a single party usurping the functions of the state turns berserk in its reaction against the libertinist antics of excessive democracy, but which the same souls will readily abandon whenever political, social, and moral chaos endanger or destroy law, order, and national security within and without. Considered empirically, as Schelling insists it should be considered, the relation of state and society is one not of contrast, but of identity. The two are not opposites, but one and the same object looked upon from different angles or vantage points, just as the state and the people are not opposites, but two phases of one and the same phenomenon. Society, considered from a specific angle, is the state, and every state so considered is a society. Society thus considered is the sum total of the natural interest spheres or groups of the citizens or subjects of the state. This grouping is based on the natural divisions of occupations and cultural variations. Society is a working unit in the cultural world, while the nation is a physical type of humanity. Or, according to another definition, society is the momentary, the passing generation in the living world of changing interests and thoughts, while the nation is the uninterrupted cohesion between our unity of generations. The household of the state is the phase representing the totality of the economic interest groups. In this capacity, the household of the state connects or deals with both politics of economics and social politics. The two activities of household and social order are essentially different, but intimately connected. The state household is concerned with the conflicting interest groups as far as they affect the very life of the state. It is concerned from this angle with the struggle between producers and consumers, agrarians and industrialists, protectionists and free traders, defenders of export industry and home manufacture, capital and labor, and large and small property owners, etc. All these problems or relationships are the concern of the state. All fall within the scope of the politics of both the economic and the social order. Under the aspect of the household, the state deals with the problem of provisioning and feeding the nation. Under the aspect of social politics, the state is concerned with the social interest groups, as far as they affect, for good or evil, the state's task of provisioning and feeding the nation. Socialism, says Schelling, recognizes only economic needs as the basis of human society, but an unbiased study of the situations created by the successive types and different stages of development of society challenges the correctness of the socialist view. To be sure, modern society is to a large extent the creation of science. Still, the basis of society, Schelling cautions, is older than science. In the sphere covered by the politics of economics, Schelling writes, the state lives only by bread. In that of social politics, we learn to know other, higher needs, increasing to the most refined demands of spiritual culture, der geistigen Kultur. Social politics traces the development of the modern social order from early clan society through the subsequent neighborhood or community state, the occupational stand stage, and the interest group stage of today, as transitions to a new order in the offing, in which a new sense of socialitat, will serve to relieve the state of its coercive coordinating activity as part of its social politics. In other words, modern sociopolitics as a necessary state function at the present time will eventually lead to a situation in which the coercive functions of the state will become superfluous and then disappear. In the first or clan order of society, men were held together by blood relationship as the normal unifying element. That was before division of labor took place. Whether still in the state of migration or in that of early domicile, the clan order had one paramount interest: the daily bread or meat or whatnot, and security and protection from other hostile clans. As clans settle in a definite territory, they begin to cultivate the land. Slowly the blood tie loosens. Blood community is replaced by labor community, blood relation by labor relation. Man feels a closer tie to his neighbor with whom he shares the daily tasks of life than with his blood relations in other village communities. The territorial aspect, says Schellen, replaces the genealogical. That is, or was, the second stage in the development of the social order. The third stage is the occupational, stand estates stage. In the agricultural economy, a gradual differentiation of needed activities takes place. It is a differentiation dictated by the changing requirements of living conditions, transcending those of food and security. Need for defense requires protection and measures for permanent defense in permanent locations. Primitive education, primitive manufacture of consumption goods, and trading all become differentiated from the function of agricultural pursuits. Vocational occupation replaces the neighborhood principle as the vivifying element of the social order. The vocational groups take the place of the community as the basis of society. Man now becomes conscious of belonging to the nobility, the clergy, the burghers, bourgeoisie. But the occupational groups, while united within themselves, soon begin to split the nation into conflicting interest groups. The French Revolution blasted the ties of the estates to restore the unity of the nation and restore the freedom of the individual. Liberty, equality, and fraternity, as established in the new political system of revolutionary France, brought the individual into direct relation with the state. The objective of the revolution was that of establishing social equality. The method of establishing it was political. The result was political rather than social. It was equality and liberty. The result was political rather than social. It was equality and liberty. The individual voted, as far as he did, no longer as one of the three estates and for the interests of the estate, but as a citizen in his own name. As a citizen, he was expected to have only one common interest, that of the state or nation. The same change took place wherever the principles of the French Revolution gained a foothold. This change ushered in the fourth stage of the Verein and Fachgenossenschaften, associations and labor organizations of many types. In the new liberal laissez-faire state or liberal laissez-faire social order, it was the political aspect of both state and society which became the leitmotif of the time. The individual was cut loose from all other ties but the state. He could vote as he pleased, he could seek employment where and when he pleased, without interference from the guilds, which were no more. But men's occupations still varied, their skills varied, the occupational opportunities varied. With the Industrial Revolution and the concentration of manufacture in the hands of the few, the freedom of labor and of the office clerk began soon to dwindle. A new sense of social and occupational interest and solidarity, or need for such solidarity, soon appeared. It eventually became so strong that it transcended once more the sense of solidarity of nation and state. Labor began the struggle for the right to organize within the nation. Soon labor came to the realization that its interests, as it conceived them, transcended the political frontiers of the nation. International labor unions came upon the scene. International labor conferences followed suit, or vice versa. The First International, the Second International, and later the Third International. Socialism and communism as formal social organizations devoted to the interests of the International Brotherhood of Labor became the new element of social solidarity as a threat to national and political individuality. This development has created a conflict of interest between employer and worker, but it has not stopped there. Differences of doctrine concerning the method of fostering the interests of either group have led to corresponding differentiation within the camps of both employer and workers. Finance, industry, agriculture, the professions and the non-worker groups all specialized in organization for the protection of their specific interests. The struggle between industrial and craft unions, between free unions and company unions, between open shops and closed shops, manifests the same tendency among the workers. Parallel with this ever-increasing differentiation of society into socio-economic interest groups, the doctrine of equalitarianism of the liberal era implied the conception of the equality of all these groups, and equality to be guaranteed through the devices of political citizenship and of direct political relationship of the interest groups to nation and state. This situation, of course, led per se to the concomitant doctrine which conceived the state as the stabilizer, the harmonizer, and the conflicts of the many interest groups. This conflict, says Schelling, indicates a transitional stage of the social order, a stage of crisis which will be succeeded by the full-grown ripe status of the social order, consisting of interest groups in a state of harmony called sociality, socialitat. 5. The state as government. Thus Schelling reaches the fifth and last aspect of the state: government, rulership, and the politics of governing or ruling. Nationality, as we are told by Schelling, signifies solidarity of the nation. Loyalty is solidarity under the aspect of law. Sociality, in turn, is solidarity among interest groups. All three are barometers of the strength of nation and state. Failure of the interest groups to coordinate their conflicting interests paralyzes both nation and state. Furthermore, in this conflict, any one of the interest groups is ever ready to use the state for its own purpose, and to blame the state if the latter refuses to favor the group's special interests. Thus, lack of sociality brings in its trail lack of loyalty and vice versa. Schelling cites as illustration the conflict between the patricians and plebeians of ancient Rome, and the latter's withdrawal from Rome and from the state in time of war. It was a case of lack of loyalty as a result of lack of sociality. He cites the situation of the English working class on the one hand and the capitalists on the other after the Industrial Revolution. In 1845, Disraeli, criticizing the situation, spoke of the two Englands, the two nations, the upper and lower classes living together, but separated in sentiment and interest as far as if an ocean lay between them. Numerous illustrations could, of course, be found elsewhere and in our time. The degree of success in the coordination of these interest groups indicates the success of statecraft. Successful statecraft presupposes the coordination of the conflicting interests, but not in favor of one group. Hence, it should preclude the attempted coordination by a single group. To accomplish this successful coordination, the state is under the obligation of resorting to all legitimate legal means to suppress lawless assertion of special interests by groups, such as strikes, sabotage, as preached and practiced by organized syndicalism in France and Italy, the France and Italy of Schelling's time. The state, says Schelling, may even resort to foreign war as a means of deflecting internal strife into the field of foreign politics. At the time of which Schelling writes, going to war was a legitimate act, at least as considered from the aspect of international law. Bismarck's wars in the 60s, the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905, and the First World War may find their explanation in such attempted deflection. But as Schelling admits, such a policy is dangerous, as Russia found after the loss of the war in 1905 and Germany in 1918, if we assume that they went to war to deflect internal conflict. The safer solution would be prophylactic action to forestall more drastic steps. According to Schelling, the state has created two agencies for such prophylactic treatment. They are agencies for the pacification and coordination of the conflicting economic interest groups. What are these two agencies? The bureaucracy and the army. Yes, this is correctly quoted. The bureaucracy and the army. The function of governing is not to be confused with the subject of constitutional law and jurisprudence. The subject of consideration by constitutional law and jurisprudence is the state as a subject of law. That of the politics of government is the activity of the legally constituted government. The study of constitutional law deals with documents, with laws. That of the politics of governing with the willing and doing of the state. It concerns itself with the question of the actual constitutional form of the state and with the sphere, extent, and imitations of the activity of the state as determined by its sovereign will. This phase of state politics is also indicated in the name of states or countries, as for instance in such names as the United States of America, the Swiss Confederation, the British Empire, the Habsburg or Austro-Hungarian monarchy. As in all other aspects of the state, the real guiding principle in the shaping of politics of governing is not the law, but political purposefulness, utility, Zweckmäßigkeit. The state, says Schelling, applies law because of the utilitarian value of the law. In everyday practical life, this fact may not always be realized by the ordinary citizen, but it is so nevertheless. In that sense, the law serves the state to establish itself as a personality endowed with reason. Hence, the rulership of the state, based on law, is the purest expression, the spirit, the mind of the state. Herein is found the kernel, the essence of the cultural nature of the state. The nation has feeling, sensation. Society has interests. The state in its governing aspect has duties. The state guides the sensual life of the nation by its reasoned, purposeful objectives. Then the state curbs the conflict of interests by its permanent institutions, such as the bureaucracy and the army. It secures legally protected freedom to an unfree society. It secures such freedom through such institutions by way of preventive, prophylactic action as preferable to other harsher measures. The form of government and the method of governing activity are largely determined by geographical, ethnical, economic, and historic factors. Tropical India cannot be governed as freely as cool Canada, writes Schelling, quoting or referring to John Morley. An industrial people demands greater liberties than an agricultural group. It is difficult to rule great empires constitutionally. He points in proof to the Brazil of 1824 to 1889 and to Russia since 1905. Such empires require the rule of the Caesar, or a federal regime, such as we find in the United States and in Brazil since 1889. Historic and cultural levels are important factors. Each nation is unique in that it injects its own peculiarities, even when it follows the pattern of other nations in the selection or creation of a new constitution. Schelling points to the mixing of foreign with domestic ideas, Roman and Germanic in the Prussian Constitution of 1851, of the monarchical and democratic elements in the Constitution of 1875 of France. But such mixtures lead eventually to struggles in which one or the other base of the mixture will come to the surface. Life will always prevail over legal or constitutional forms. Custom, conventional law precede and supplant written law. Government politics and the science concerned with the politics of government, therefore, deal with various forms of political control. corresponding to changing conditions of society. They deal with changing forms of the Constitution, with the inadequacy of the simple quantitative element as differentiated from the They deal with changing forms of the Constitution, with the inadequacy of the simple quantitative element as differentiated from the qualitative element in the liberal democratic system of representation and election. They deal with the alternating of proportional voting and representation on the basis of the vocations and interest groups. They deal finally and most importantly with the attempted synthesis or coordination of the present-day conflict of the interest groups, a conflict ever growing in extent and intensity, until at times and in places it overshadows all other exigencies of state, national, and social life. Footnote 2. Page references to specific quotations from Schelling and to particular ideas given here in paraphrase form are found in the authors From Geopolitik to Political Relativism, cited above. The preceding outline represents in greatly simplified form the essence of the teaching of Schelling's new geopolitical science of states. It must be admitted that the subject matter seems to wander rather far from geopolitik, except in the material dealing with the first aspect of the state, i.e. the state considered as realm. But since the other four aspects, people, household, society, and government, are essential attributes of the state, all come under the consideration of geopolitik, as it is to be practiced by the state according to the new geopolitical science. Hence, all five aspects of the state are considered the legitimate subject of concern and ministration by the new science.